Seeing a quorum of voting members, I call the May 14th Cincinnati School Board Committee of the Whole, Student Achievement and District Instructional Performance Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Assistant Treasurer Augustine. Oh, we got to do the pro tem, I'm sorry. Is there a motion to appoint our legendary member, Brandon Craig,
So moved.
as a treasurer?
Second.
Okay, well, that's great. You got it when I didn't even finish the whole title.
There you go.
Okay,
Roll call.
roll call. Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossett? Yes. Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Ms. Mapp?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffett?
Yes.
And then
Mr.
we'll also do the attendance roll.
Okay, there you go.
All right. Mr. Craig?
Here.
Mr. Crossett? Here. Mr. Lindy?
Here.
Ms. Mapp?
Here.
Mrs. Weinberg? Vice President Bolton?
Present.
President Moffett?
Here. Thank you. The chair will now entertain a motion and a second to approve the May 14th Committee of the Whole Business Meeting Agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
Thank you.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossett? Yes. Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Ms. Mapp?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffett?
Yes, this evening's agenda is approved as posted. Assistant Treasurer Augustine, please introduce our first presentation.
Actually, I think this one's for the superintendent.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, my notes say the wrong thing. Superintendent Murphy, please, please present our first presentation.
The money presentation is much more important, but that's fine. So what we'll have first, if it's okay, is Assistant Superintendent Randolph is coming to give an update about Yonder Pouches. I believe she and Ms. Monisha House, who reports directly to the deputy, worked a bit on this data to share today.
Good evening, afternoon. Just a quick update on Yonder. I know that there have been some questions and just looking for some data and feedback. So we have created a survey, so we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I just broke it down into two specific areas. We looked at some overall academic impacts. So what we looked at was in first semester, we saw 12 of our high schools had a reduction in the ninth grade failure rates. And then also looking at the cohort of eighth graders last year and where they were at ninth grade first semester this year, we saw that those same eighth graders had less failure rate in ninth grade as well. So kind of similar data, except you're looking at the same students. So the number of Fs they had in the eighth grade versus the number that they had in ninth. We also noticed an increase, or 100% of the administrators and 78% of the teachers said that they saw an increase in the student engagement. So that came directly from the survey. The other was specific failure data pulled from Focus. So also, as the superintendent said, along with our PBIS director, we were able to get the survey out. So we were able to survey principals, teachers, parents, and students. So it went out to all stakeholder groups. So some of the questions that were more just around actual application, 93% of the administrators said that they had noticed more positive student interactions and a reduction in behavior issues. 79% of the teachers said that they saw better classroom management. 59% of the parents were in support of continued use of the cell phone free policy. And then 59% of the students rated that they did not feel that there was a change in their level of focus and engagement compared to prior to the having no cell phone. Some of the students had shared in their survey that they already didn't have a phone in class prior to, like some teachers collected them. So that was some of their information that they shared as well. The next slide is, I think, is just really the glows and grows. So really based on what our feedback said, and so it's very duplicative, to be honest. I think I just got really excited and made two slides that were so similar. But one thing that I wanted to specifically point out is how to ensure in the grows, if the students don't see the alignment and a decrease of the negative peer-to-peer interactions, then we need to make sure that they do feel that way or figure out how we're expressing that, because we do want the students to feel that this is something that's valuable to them. So that's an area that we need to think about. Another area of growth that I've talked with our curriculum department about is if the students also don't feel more engaged, when the students don't have that phone or something else, how do we ensure that our classroom instruction is engaging for students as well? Or how do we ensure that they understand the difference in engagement and what that looks like from not having their phone, but what does instruction look like as we think about that? So some of our next steps, one piece is we do, it's not on here right now, but I know one of our pieces I just had met with the middle school team, and we are going to implement as well at the middle schools. So all of our middle schools, junior highs will have the Yonder pouches as well. So working with them on implementation plans. They're going to work with some of the high school principals to talk about what worked, what didn't work, what would they suggest, so that we can make sure that we have a streamlined implementation. Some of the other next steps that we talked about are thinking about activities to continue the positive interactions. I know one thing Dr. Williams really talked about was students in the lunchroom and that positive interactions that she saw from students being able to play Uno or cards or just playing board games together. And that was something that she really did through a streamlined donation support with partners and other parents, teachers. And so I think that's something that I feel like we could increase at the other schools, because I don't see that as much. There is a lot more student engagement just talking, but there's not as many opportunities to do games or other areas. So I think that could be an area we want to think about. Also thinking about the arrival procedures. So as our students at the high schools all go through the metal detector, this is another area when you have 1,000, 1,200 students coming in. We don't want to have students losing instructional time because they're in line because of a Yonder pouch. So making sure that we streamline those procedures, ensuring that students are able to get through quickly, and that all of the processes allow for that. Also thinking about providing support to schools as students do lose the pouch or as they break. Right now, we just ordered cell phone lockers, so that way if a student does not have their phone and they self-turn it in, they can just stick it in this cell phone locker. The principal or school staff locks it, and at the end of the day, they can pick it up more quickly. So that is something that has been helpful to a couple of our larger schools, because by the end of this year, we had a couple schools that had almost 200 cell phones that didn't have a pouch, because if the student can't replace it or the school ran out, they have to go into the locker. So that's an area that we have to think about more strategically. And then also, I shared already, but collaborating with curriculum and instruction around how to focus teaching and learning around engagement from feedback from students. So that's where we are right now.
Thank you. Do board members have any questions, comments? Board Member Craig.
Thank you for the presentation. I think it was certainly good to hear a little bit about what's kind of been going well and what areas we're going to improve. I do think the arrival time is the one I just observed from visiting a school at the time. It was both chaotic because of when students arrive and having to go through metal detectors and the other stuff that we do to ensure their safety. But also, you had students who, it's like, all right, they're not prepared, they didn't have their bag, the pouch out, all these other things that add steps into that. So I was happy to see that. And I also had the question about what would we be doing for our middle schools and/or the junior highs. So I appreciate you sharing both of those pieces of information. And then the last thing I will say, again, I think it's important that we think about the Yonder pouch for a lot of other reasons. I think the other major reason is that the state is becoming more and more dedicated to this idea of no phones in the school. And so, there's not like there's an option where we would say we'd go back to allowing students to sit in the class with their phones. It's just maybe other ways that we would do preventing students from having phones out. And so I think that's the other thing that just to recognize is that it's not a go back to everybody has their phone and can do whatever they want kind of approach.
Sure.
Board Member Mapp, did you have a question? You got your mic off.
Yes, so thank you for providing this update about the Yonder pouches. I do think, as we're talking about supporting and assisting the students with being more engaged and interacting with one another, I think that SEL curriculum, as we'll be discussing today, I think that will be a great opportunity to help the students engage with one another on a different level and a deeper level, and allow for that interpersonal relation skills to be developed. So interested in seeing how that possible connection could work. But I do want to inquire about the, you stated that there's a reduction in ninth grade failure rates out of 12 schools. Are you able to provide maybe more succinctly what that data point looks like in terms of how many students have, the data has changed in terms of the reduction rate?
Yeah, I don't have it with me on here, but I do have a slide, or I have a actual breakdown of all of the failure rates by school. So, and I think also Schroeder Middle's in there as well. So I can provide just like the percentage of decrease by school.
Okay, I think that would be really helpful as
Yeah.
we're, again, looking at the goals and guardrails and, you know, just trying to determine how our students are performing and also what it looks like in correlation to the discipline.
Definitely.
Vice President Bolton?
Thank you very much. Thanks for the report. I'm interested in a couple of things. I'm interested particularly in maybe a survey or some sort of assessment as to whether or not families, parents, caregivers feel that they have been able to be served to reach their kids, if indeed, because of the Yonder piece and vice versa. I don't know how to measure that, but to see if there's some sort of customer satisfaction and whether or not there's differing degrees as to whether or not buildings who are receiving the calls are actually somehow sending that message to the students or whatever. I just think that that was the big concern, and I'd like to see some kind of data that demonstrates that we're delivering on that. I know a previous superintendent would always say there has to be a live person answering the phone, and I know we're in a different world right now, but I do think that would be interesting. I have a question about, there was always an emphasis that the kids had to use the phones for instruction, and at least that was a claim. Have we addressed that, not just for homework, but during the class period itself? Is that still an issue, or?
So some of the courses, like CCP courses, did require that. So we were able to purchase more. So there's like a way to unlock them. There's like some
Right.
that are not on the stands. So the teachers that needed them, we were able to ensure that they had access to have their own, I don't want to say unlocker, but like an unlocking unit in their classroom. Also, we have students like that leave to go to Tri-Health, and they need to make sure that they have access
Right.
to their phone so that, you know, if they have an emergency on the bus or anything. So yes, so we've been able to navigate all of that by ensuring that the classrooms that need that have access to allow students to have their phones out. There's also been a shift in ensuring that if it's something that can be done on their one-to-one device, making sure that they utilize that first if that's an option. But a lot of times what comes up is the dual authentication, is like if you log into like a Miami course, you have to do like Duo to show that you're, you know, that it's really you. So that was really the main areas. They needed to get it out for that, and then they could do the work on their device, like their actual computer.
I think any chance we get to proactively reassure families that indeed it's available for instruction, and that happens, and that indeed we are sending the messages, and the kids are feeling as though they're not left adrift. Finally, fascinating what you talked about regarding what they've been able to do at Hughes regarding board games and what have you. Some of us will remember more than a decade ago, there was a book, Bowling Alone, which started to talk about the fact that people were just breaking into individual centers. I've noticed there are schools that are trying to do the board game piece. And I can remember many years ago, a wonderful principal of mine, when all this was kind of, cell phones were new and what have you, being excited that the kids needed to, when they were in the lunchroom, to actually play cards. And teachers were, oh, no, don't do that. And this very veteran this principal, God rest her soul, said, one day you'll be happy that they still remember how to talk to each other personally. And if you look at some of the social places where people now go to have a good time, thinking a place in my own neighborhood, it's called Free Parking. And the purpose of it is that there's food and there's drinks and there's tables set up and you bring your own games, but you do it there. I think we are trying to reintroduce ourselves to one another without the mechanics. And I think the more we can help do that, I think would be great. And having grown-ups help facilitate that, or peers facilitate that, might be a good way regarding positive school culture. Thank you.
So thank you for the presentation. I do have a couple questions. This is just updated for you. So I am so appreciative of the presentation and the data. I'm very curious about, and I wrote this down, I think it was Board Member Mapp's question around the ninth grade failure rate reduction. I'm very curious about that and would love to see more. I'm also interested in the discipline data around fights and the correlation between cell phone usage being a manipulator of some fights and discipline data. Again, tying it to the goals and guardrails, but more specifically at our high school level. Since you brought up ninth graders, that's a great place to start, but because I would imagine 9 and 10, 7 through 10 is a little bit more rambunctious than 11 and 12, if I had to think about it. But I'm very curious around that data and the Yonder pouches. When was the survey conducted? What time of year?
So I did this presentation, I think was initially going to be in April, so March, February, end of February, I believe it was through spring break.
Did we do a big beginning survey as a foundation from the fall to? If we did not, it's not a criticism; it's a kind of a concern because I'm curious as to what their perception was in the fall and what their perception is in the spring. Because when I talked to some students, they didn't like it. They told me that they didn't like it, but they were more engaged. That was in the fall. And it would be very interesting to see what happens in the spring, which leads me to my next concern/question. I visited a couple of schools just in general, not even looking for Yonder pouches, and seen boatloads of Yonder pouches that were broken, or I'm going to assume they were all broken. It's a significant amount of money that's just sitting there that's disturbing to me. Additionally, students have shown where they don't put real phones in the Yonder pouches. They're not utilizing the Yonder pouches the way that they were intended. It becomes a checkbox item instead of an actual reduction of cell phone usage. It's just kind of a way to get around the system. And at one school, which I absolutely love, the students had passed around some magnet to open the Yonder pouches mid-morning. So my question/concern is, I don't want this to be a checkbox item because the governor has, in his address, mandated that there should be no cell phone usage. And I think parents need to know that that's not coming from CPS, it's coming from the state. But what are we doing to course correct and to pivot rather than it just be something that we put in schools and we let them go to we're actually making some corrections midstream to be effective and then measuring that. I think having students not stand outside because of a Yonder pouch is great, but I also think it's just as detrimental to have them put a fake phone in there or go around mid-morning and get the phones out. So, we need to, I think we should would like for us to collect some additional data, survey them multiple times a year, but then also find out, honestly, what's going on in our schools. And then are there schools that don't use Yonder pouches? I know for some of our elementaries, they use Ziploc bags and they use the lockers that you mentioned. Is there a more cost-effective way to, because I see a lot of Yonder pouches just sitting in a bucket, that bothers me. Is there another way that schools have found to kind of mitigate some of that damage and not buy Yonder pouches, but do something different? So those were my questions.
So just a couple quick responses, but there will be some work that I'll have to do with Dr. House around some of the requests. But we did not do a fall survey. We really just focused on implementation timeline there because we rolled out in schools had all the way through first quarter to get them out. So that is a good call out, and especially will be a good data point when we do it in the fall to just talk about spring to fall. And then again, like you said, more checkpoints throughout. We did talk about even maybe putting it in our climate survey, like could there be a few questions there, just so that we could have those regular check-ins, and especially since that's already going out and we don't, over-survey people. So we can definitely get on that for next year. I think also, so similar to what you shared, I noticed at a building a couple weeks ago, I was just doing like walkthroughs with the principal, and we saw I want to say quite a few, maybe 8 to 10 phones in courses, like in classrooms, without like redirection. So I did level set with the principals a few weeks ago that as we get to the end of the year, we want to ensure our procedures are still in place, making sure, because it's one thing if you put the wrong phone in the pouch, but you also don't get it out all day. It's another to just be utilizing your phone in class. So we've talked about ensuring that expectations are clear and consistent through the whole year, going through and ensuring that we continue to do those Yonder pouch checks. Like that was a piece of feedback a few weeks ago. We met with Yonder, and also they visited to do a couple of rivals, and just to share some best practices around checkpoints, seeing can we fix some of them, some cannot be fixed, agree, how do we make sure that we don't create more discipline by saying you broke your Yonder pouch, because we did see, as you talked about discipline data, one thing we talked about was Category 1 offenses went up when we talked about students having their phone out in class. So teachers are logging that a student had their phone out. However, I know Dr. House was working on the discipline data around Category 2, and overall it appeared to be down in the fighting area, but I don't know that it's because of phones or not, but that was an area that we talked about, that we saw an increase in Category 1 because of those logging that a student had a phone and so we don't want to increase discipline but we also don't want to, we want to ensure that students also understand that they do need to utilize the pouch, or, if they don't have it, then they are supposed to self-turn in. So I do agree that there are some systems in our first year that we're learning from and plan to move forward.
Thank you. And my last question is around student fees, because there are a significant number of pouches that are broken. How we do have a policy around not charging student fees for student fees, academics, I'm going to say, like.
Yeah, the general, yeah.
But are we charging for the pouches? Like how is that going for students that break their pouch or don't have one?
So it is logged, and then there's like a general account that they go into that we will repurchase with. So there was a student fee created. We did want to make sure it was consistent with the Yonder cost. Like one school was like $100, and I was like, no, they're like 19 or something. So we all have one general cost. The treasurer's office has created a line that can actually be logged that a student lost or broke their pouch. However, then it becomes, do we give them another, or do they turn it in every day? Because if they lost it first quarter, that's a really long process for a student to not have a pouch. So some of the students or some of the schools have looked at utilizing title dollars or donations, because we do need, their Yonder's recommendation is a 20% refresh every year. That's just how many you'll need, because students move, you lose them, things happen. But definitely have been able to collect some student fees, but not nearly the number that we've actually had to replace.
So do we have that data around, even if it, not that we've collected it, how many have been logged as needing to be replaced? That would be interesting data too.
I can, the schools, they have a list of who, so I can ask them for that.
I mean, that's going to give us some quantitative data around how many Yonder pouches are being broken, misplaced, et cetera. Thank you so much.
And the students are creative. We've had one in a burrito, we've had one in a Stanley cup. They put their phones in so they can get through, and they're creative, so.
They're very smart.
Yes.
Very smart. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's see. Superintendent Murphy, please introduce our second presentation.
Yes, ma'am. And so now we'll have a presentation. The next two actually are going to be given by our Director of Positive School Culture, Ms. Monisha House.
Good afternoon, everyone. Code of conduct. So the discipline committee for the district has been meeting all year long, really looking at key points in data to really guide our work and to look at where we feel like there might be confusion based on the data, based on referrals. So we actually pulled out specific student examples of referrals that have been written, incidences that have occurred. And so because of that, there were a couple things that really shone through that we can definitely improve, as well as overall creating accessibility of our code of conduct to our staff. So we're looking forward to next year with partnering with our partners to help support us in at least being able to print the code of conduct for our school-facing staff, for our teachers and principals, so that they can use that for a tool, and as a teaching tool and a professional development tool as they have conversations around expectations and guidance on next steps. So what we have for you is a document that just kind of outlines where the opportunity lies to be able to make some amendments, some clarity around wording, what the original text was, the recommended text, and just kind of a brief explanation of why. So the first improvement that we wanted to make was around the word profanity. When we looked at many referrals, there are many students, high number of students being suspended or sent to the Promise Center for profanity and obscene language. And so we wanted to clarify, is this profanity that student is just using inappropriate language? They're not really gearing it towards someone, they're just using inappropriate language that needs to be corrected? Or is this language really used in a threatening manner? It's towards someone that's completely different. So we wanted to make clarity between those two to say that in category 1, it is inappropriate communication and profanity, which is the language that's not directed towards anyone. And if you look at the recommended text, it really restates that students are expected to speak respectfully to others. Examples of inappropriate communication include put-downs, making fun of or negatively talking about someone or their family, or using profane gestures. These includes written, electronic, and verbal communication. Profanity should not be used, even if it's not directed towards someone. So we want to make that clear. It's not that we're saying it's okay to use profanity as long as it's not directed towards someone. It shouldn't be used as a part of our expectations in our learning environment. So the next update that we made was around, there was a line that said cell phones can only be used as allowed by the school and school rules. We wanted to provide clarity around that and not confuse students or parents that cell phones can no longer be used. We just need to follow the school rules and district expectations around that. All right, so those are the updates that were made in category 1. So in category 2, we qualified the profanity and obscene language. That is really about the language. Students must not use language or communication that causes extreme offense to any individual or the school community. And so that not only includes profanity, but it also includes language that is based on race, gender, religious beliefs, nationality, disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity or expression. We wanted to call that out. For the next opportunity for an update, really thinking about the languages around damaging and destruction of property. The update is really just adding the word intentionally, that students that are intentionally misusing equipment or school property, such as propping doors that can cause a safety issue, or misusing technology by creating VPNs to get around firewalls, that can make us accessible to things as an entity. We just wanted to call that out and adding that into the destruction of property. On sexting, we made just some small grammatical errors or changes to that, just to really make sure that that was clear. Students are prohibited from engaging in sexting, which means sending these explicit images through or messages through electronic media, such as text messaging. The next opportunity to change was around breaking and entering. We just changed that language that was more to forceful entry, which is more appropriate for students and less criminalizing language. In the breaking and entering, we also added that students must stay out of locked and/or private areas. So it might be an area that students shouldn't get into, but for whatever reason, it might not be an area that can physically be locked, but if they know that they should not go into that area. Under the chart, under Be Responsible, there was language around choose the right time to celebrate. It was interesting, kind of awkward in where it was placed, so the committee felt that it was more appropriate to just remove that language. And then under the chart of Be Respectful, it was accept refusals gracefully. Felt like that wording could be confusing to some. What does that mean? And so we just wanted to be clear that students should accept refusals. Sometimes the answer is no. We need to accept that and then obey the rules of the school community, including the city and state laws. Under page 21 for corrective strategies, we wanted to make sure that we added in the menu of restorative responses, that we can add restorative conferencing, because that is a strategy that can be added, that can be supportive of addressing the infraction and addressing the student and any harm that has been caused by what has occurred. And then at the very end, we do want to update the acknowledgement link so that we are collecting the data and making sure that we know where parents have signed off saying that they have read and reviewed the code of conduct. And those are the recommended updates.
Thank you so much. Board members, as you may know, this needs to be presented to us formally, and then we will see it again on Monday. Any questions? Or we will have additional questions or concerns. Board Member Craig.
So thank you for the first of two presentations you're going to be doing for us today.
No problem.
I wanted to ask a little bit of this question, or question a little bit about the changing around the language regarding profanity and obscenity, and I really want to maybe dive a little bit of better understanding around kind of the use of the causes extreme offense to the school, because I do think that is a very open language that could be interpreted very differently based on who's kind of deciding what's causing offense. So I just wanted to hear maybe a little bit of an explanation as to how either we are going to provide guidance on that or how that language is being interpreted or expected to be interpreted.
I am so glad that you asked that as the first question. So with these recommendations, along with a lot of many of the other categories, especially in 1, 2, and 3, we realized that we have to do professional development and ongoing throughout the year. So the committee is going to continue to work. That's our biggest thing next year, of providing supports. I know as the Positive School Culture team, we will continue to work to try to embed this as what we're also doing as opportunities to have conversation and dialogue and vignettes around what do you do as a teacher, what do you do as an administrator, because we do see the vast array of how people handle similar situations, whether it's teachers doing something different and or administrators doing something different. So we would see a student might have used one word that was a profane language, and then another student that cussed everyone out in the classroom and went up and down the aisles, and the teacher could not teach, and they received the same consequence. And so we really do just need to continue. A part of that is going to be able to not only just provide guidance on paper, because it could be interpreted different ways, but just a training together. And so I've had a conversation with Julie Sellers about partnering with that we can bring building reps and principals together so that we're all doing this together, so that we can be on the same page with our interpretation and how we support one another.
And I think for me, part of this also is an expectation. If we're thinking about language that is offensive that may not be profane, making sure that we're also holding our staff, our teachers to that same level of expectations and administrators. Because what we so often hear the students say is, well, but they're allowed to do X, why am I not allowed to do X? And so when it's not like profanity, when it's not, using something that would otherwise be like a generally obscene type statement, and it's more of an offensive statement, I do think it should be very helpful to have some kind of guidance and even if not examples of or situations in which. The other part to that for me is also using gestures and other things that we do know there are a number of gestures, designs, other things that are connected to groups that are not a part of what we would want in our schools on a regular basis that some students may bring into the building. And so, again, I think there's maybe a need to also educate so that teachers are aware of, or especially as we have some schools that are changing the communities that they serve, that they may be a mixture of folks coming in who bring things that were not a part of the school culture before. So that, again, teachers are aware of what those things mean, what those things are, why they're said a certain way, and that they're not that precipitous for fighting and other things that might occur afterwards.
Absolutely. And sometimes there's misunderstanding about language as well and the intent behind the language that's being used. So there's a lot of opportunity to not only teach, but also an opportunity to model for our students, model for our guests that come into our building, just to continue to create the learning environment that we want for all.
Did you have a question? Vice President Bolton.
Thank you very much. This is all part of Yonder as well, and as well as what you're going to be presenting in just a moment. It's all interrelated, so I like all these coming together in a cluster. I think that's very helpful, at least to me. I liked what you said about we don't want to criminalize the language, but yet I also want to make sure that there are those things that could happen in a building that are criminal acts. Has General Counsel reviewed the work
Yes.
that's being presented to us? I appreciate that. Reference regarding hate speech. We maybe have gotten through a very hot period of time when that was very prevalent. How is hate speech addressed in here, since we have board policy that talks or speaks against hate speech? Is that one of the phrases that you were using regarding, cascading or doing something negative towards people, or where does this appear?
So I think it depends. I wish I could say there's black and white. Depending on the situation, it could be a situation where it's considered a category 2 profanity and obscene language, depending on what they're using. If they're using language that is against or disparaging language based on race, gender, that could be considered hate speech. I don't think we use that terminology in our code of conduct, but it could also be a part of category 3 with intimidation and bullying and making those threats. So it could depend on the situation and what is said and the.
I think that's a perfect answer,
Yeah.
and that's also part of why this is confusing to me, that there have to be some things, and you're right about, we don't want one teacher do one thing, another teacher do another, and yet that happens, and it's gonna happen. And there are teachers that, with not saying a word, can control a classroom with a simple whisper, and others can't. I mean, so there's that variation, but there must be certain things, and I don't know if that's that level 3 or what, that a whole school culture has to say, this is unacceptable. Or
Absolutely.
Because we've lived through that and had a negative impact on one of our schools particularly just a few years ago. So I want to make sure that we maybe review the board policy, confidence in General Counsel and in you and the deputy and looking at that, but you might want to see just how strong the policy is regarding that. And then the other piece, I think it is important to, for the discipline committee, and I know you are doing this, but that there has to be continuing the categorizing and inventory of those acts that are violent, those things that do represent threats to people, either students to students or student to teacher or teacher to student. And we don't really want necessarily that data we may or may not see, but I am stunned, and I appreciate I think it's the deputy that's doing this particularly, and I've said this before, I do appreciate that we find things out very rapidly on a daily basis, but I just know and hope that all that's being inventoried, and I worry greatly about the level of violence that our kids are seeing outside of our building. And I know most of them come to the school to be safe, and I value that. But hopefully you all have that data and are evaluating it as professionals. Thank you.
Can I mention a few things that are going on behind the scenes? So the committee evaluates, we go through and we look at discipline data, but also as the Positive School Culture team, every week on Monday, we are reviewing and we're looking at discipline data trends. We are looking at where do we see kind of hot spots? Do we see any trends regarding areas in the city? Do we see that? And we're continuing to dig deeper. Where do we see that overlap with attendance? There's data that they're starting to present and share with us regarding medical information, and it's not identifiable, so I don't know who it is, but enrollments regarding anxiety and depression, so that we can see if there are trends. So I said, oh, there's a lot going on in the Westwood area that I have not seen at the school yet. Let's talk to the staff to see if they're starting to see anything, or how can we be proactive. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do to be more strategic about the data that we have, so that we can be proactive in addressing to figure out what the needs are so that we can meet them.
I appreciate that, and I think that would be reassuring to our families as well. And I do like the interfacing with the neighborhood and what is happening. I just would ask the one question too, finally, that, if the state didn't require this, how would CPS actually develop positive school culture? I don't need an answer, don't worry, don't anybody worry, but I just wonder if there's a way that we could sensify this with or without the state's help. And I don't know if the parameters that they set are so great or so different, but I would like to make sure that we're doing something that's relevant to us, not necessarily relevant to the state legislature or the governor. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Board Member Crossett.
Just a quick question, I don't expect an answer to this question, but you mentioned about the workarounds with the VPN. I'd be curious if maybe somebody could put together a project to prevent that. It seems like that would be a pretty big risk that maybe could be mitigated. So thank you.
I think our ITM department is consistently working hard to address any type of loopholes. The fortunate thing is we have very brilliant students. And so once we feel like sometimes we might fix an area, then we realize, oh, wait, they found a different area. So it's a matter of continuing to engage them.
Yeah. Maybe we could hire those students.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. I have a couple of questions. I was glad that Board Member Craig brought this up, because to me, some of this is very subjective, and it's unfortunate. We can't do something about all of it, but the definition of profanity is subjective to me, because the definition says it's referred to as expletives, swearing, oaths, cursing, or cussing, and by a variety of euphemisms, including four-letter words and foul language. However, for some of our students, that's a regular, everyday, normal conversation. So it concerns me that, well, I guess my point is that we need to do some serious cultural competency training for our staff, because that's where some of the referrals are coming from, because one teacher or school personnel feels like this is offensive and another may not, to Board Member Bolton's point. Some teachers have great classroom management and they wouldn't even dare to do that. And then others, they're cussing out the teacher and the teacher doesn't say anything. So having said that, do we happen to have the data around the number of referrals specifically around profanity, or the past Category 1 offenses for the profanity or obscenity.
We do have the data.
So it would be very interesting to me to get that data around students that have been charged with those category offenses. And, I'm also interested in what schools those are. Is it around a certain teacher? Is there any disparate data, boys versus girls, Black versus white? It would be really, really interesting to me to see where we need to do some additional training. To me, the data is going to point us in that direction. Do we need to do it at XYZ school because this particular teacher has had 30 profanity cases in 2 weeks? Maybe that would hone in on the direction that we need to go around that. The other thing that I thought is, I think it's great to print the copies, but I also think it's great to have things electronically so that students, I know they're not supposed to have their phones and their devices, but they do. But parents do have phones and devices. And I would really love to see, I know robocalls have the ability to do text, they have the ability to do emails. It would be really nice if we sent that out electronically to all the parents so that we could, A, say that we did that, and B, ensure that they got it. Print is expensive. We don't have, clearly we're in budget cuts, but electronic, we can make it as an Adobe PDF and get it sent out at relatively little to no cost. So I'd love to see exploration around that. Sexting, on the one on page 19, there, to me, we just recently had a situation where there was a sharer and a recorder. There was a person who recorded something inappropriate, and there was a person who shared something inappropriate. To me, there's no differentiation there, and there needs to be. It needs to be a harsher offense to me, well, just me. There needs to be differentiation between if you recorded something and if you shared something. And we just recently had a situation where the person who shared it is being punished and not the person who recorded it. That needs to be outlined very, very clearly because it is now being challenged by this family. And we need to really have some clear delineation and some expectation. And I would even love to see that be discussed with students, taken off the paper and discussed with students, because that is an area where I think we are finding discipline and, criminal charges can happen or happening, and they're not clear on that. I'm not clear on that, and it's not clear here. The last thing I'm going to bring up is, it says on page 20, students need to be responsible. Student expected behavior. Is that saying that that's coming out, or is that saying that that's going in? I think it's on the next page, Rob. It was page 20, and it says, student, updated language provides, the fourth one down, clarity for student expected behavior. What is that? Is that part defined? Because some students will say, they have adult responsibility, so they're doing what they're supposed to do. And I'm wondering, again, to me, student expected behavior sounds very subjective. So I just don't know if that's an area that we need to clarify, or is that clarified somewhere?
And what page are you on again? Just wanted to make
It's
sure.
at page 20, chart.
Under be responsible?
Be respectful. And it just said updated language provides clarity for student expected behavior. So that part's, is that just saying that's what the recommendation is?
Under be responsible, the language that is in there is choose the right time to celebrate, and we were just taking out that phrase, choose the right time to celebrate.
No, the next one down.
Oh, the next one down. So the language that we're keeping in is just accept refusals and obey the rules of the school and community, including the city and state laws.
Okay, so that's what's
That is what
considered
is staying.
student expected behavior.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And my last comment is, you made a very good observation and comment that I think I want to take off the paper. You said that students are very brilliant and they're very savvy, and they are kind of able to pivot much faster than we are. Do you have any students on the committee?
No, we do not currently, but that is something that I've asked about to get their feedback regarding, because it's one thing to have it on paper, it's another thing to see how it's implemented. And just because something is in the code of conduct, this lists our expectations for what helps us govern our schools to make it a safe space, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every situation that a student is involved with has to result in a punitive measure. Some of the things that we need to do is actually teaching our kids. So for example, some programs that we're looking at to address vaping, because it is an issue with our young people, we realize it has to be more than just a promise center or an expulsion consequence. We actually have to teach them, we have to support them. So we have some work dealing with UMADOP. There's a program we're looking at with Xavier to be able to really help support these students with understanding the importance of not vaping, what it does to their body, and then helping them if they're really addicted to that substance. So some of the things that have to come about are really teaching the kids and the staff as well.
So I think it would be great to have like a student positive school culture
too.
committee that can oversee this, or or at least look at this and provide the adults that are making these changes with some recommendations, if for no other reason, on how to jailbreak it, because they're super smart. And so I just don't hear or see the student voice. That was the only thing that I was mentioning. Board Member Matt.
Yeah, so thank you for this presentation. You all brought up a lot of the, questions or concerns that I had, and I'm so glad that you just spoke on really helping our students understand what this code of conduct entails, as well as our teachers. So I appreciated hearing about the professional development, but more importantly, hearing that there's efforts and initiatives to not just say, well, these are the rules and the expectations. Well, we can't expect our students to follow them if they only have to sign off, and right, because most times they're not really interfacing with that. So how do we weave that into the process where they're able to understand, oh, this is a part of our culture, we're invested in our school culture, and then that will help to support them actually abiding by or following those expectations. To the point of the student engagement piece and a committee, I'm curious to know when certain infractions occur. Is there actually, I guess, kind of a restorative team, right? If an incident happens, if there is a team or a committee that reviews that incident, right, and offers that restorative approach to, one, not only just investigate, but really support the students in saying, okay, well, this was a warning, right? Or this was maybe a tiered type of consequence. Do we have some type of committee to review that or to support the students in that? Or is it just the administration or the principal investigate and then determine what the actual infraction will be?
So regarding the consequence of whatever that the infraction has been deemed to, ultimately the administration decides. However, in spite of that, there are teams at schools that continue to grow and be more involved as we continue to provide professional development, depending on if there needs to be just a restorative conversation or if there really needs to be a restorative conference where that student can listen to those that they have impacted by their behavior that they've, negatively, and to come up with the solution of how they can collectively resolve and come back together. Because that is a piece that we miss if students are suspended or expelled. When they come back and we don't do that piece, it's as if nothing happened. They were just removed from the situation to come right back to the same situation, and that rebuilding doesn't occur and re-entry back into the community doesn't occur. So that's something that we continue to work on. At the Promise Center, we're going to continue to improve. They do have conversations with students and talking with them about reflective activities and restorative conversations. That is good. It's even better when you do it with the people that you were engaged with when the incident happened.
Okay, thank you, because I do think that it can be beneficial, and I don't know how time-consuming it is, but to have kind of a, I know everyone doesn't want to hear maybe DEI, right? Not here, but that really that diverse lens of where maybe it's the administrator, maybe it's a counselor or a social worker, maybe it's a student that's on that committee, but to really look at the situation to ensure that how these infractions are being handled is being handled from an equitable lens, right? And making sure that it's a fair and due diligent process in place.
And we're also asking our PBIS teams to review their data and review cases like this as well. So it's an opportunity for us to learn as individual institutions, especially if they see trends.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Craig.
Just wanted to offer a thought or suggestion. Or so I know one part is we're changing the language from breaking and entering to forceful entry. And I think it might be helpful to mirror the language that we use by stealing by force, because what would not be considered part of forceful entry would be the threat of force, way that it's currently worded. So it says students must not enter by force. I'm trying to read where it says here, but students must not force their way into places or onto property. And I think the way we use it in the stealing by force is that students must not take or attempt to take from another by force or threat of force. And so I just think using that kind of language, that must not must not enter a space or gain access to a space by force or threat of force, might give us a little bit more room to address, again, someone accessing space by not actually using physical force, but by threatening to use physical force, which we would also probably say is not the best way for them to access space. The other thing I was just wondering on that is that, does that include accessing, whether it's like, are we including things like gaining entry by evading a method that's the normal method of getting into a space? So for instance, if you're hopping a wall to get into a space as opposed to breaking down the door, are we considering that in that same category of entry?
It could be. It could very well be. Or it could be out of bounds
Yeah,
and
I mean,
out of area, but yes.
Okay, because I'm just thinking about using a window that's open or propping a door open, these type
Exactly.
of things that are ways to access that are not permitted, that would evade the idea of using force. And so, I mean, I just think that maybe.
Because like I say, I didn't force my way in.
Yeah.
It was open.
Great. Thank you so much. Superintendent Murphy, please introduce our third presentation.
Yeah, Ms. House is going to continue with the next presentation, a busy day for her, our social emotional learning curriculum pilot.
Well, it all flows together. And so I'm asking my psychologist in our department, Sarah Hayes, who's done a lot of great work with the SEL pilot, to be able to come. We're going to kind of co-present what has been occurring. There was a lot of great questions that we want to be able to answer, and we received a lot of great feedback from teachers, administrators across the district. Before we got to this point, there has been a lot of surveys given regarding culture and climate, and a lot of indication, even with our climate data and with our student discipline data, that there is a need for SEL. And the need for SEL is needed, especially in our district, to build consistency and equitable access. Right now, there is not. Some schools have something, some schools have nothing. They're piecemealing, they're trying to find things. And that's very concerning when you think about the whole child and being able to support the whole child and being able to proactively teach those skills that we want students to continue to emulate and continue to have, to be able to support their learning, to create a safe environment. So this will support us with consistency across the district, continuity, expectations, and resources to be able to support all of our schools across the district. Next slide. All right, so best practices, that's what this is about. We've done a lot of research, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide. We've done a lot of research, and what was important for us is it's better, we just don't want something nice to have, because number one, we just don't have the time nor the resources. Like, we have to do things that are going to impact, and impact in a great way. And so SEL outcomes, when implemented well, help support stronger relationships, reduce discipline, greater engagement, pro-social skills that we want to be able to develop with students, especially when we're thinking about our middle school learners. and all of the wonderful skills they're going to bring with them. We want to be able to address some of the concerns that they're going to have and proactively teach them. How do I communicate with my peer? How do I work together? How do I communicate things about myself or find things about myself? But ultimately, we want to be able to impact graduation rate, higher employment, positive climate and safety, and overall health and wellness, not just for the students, but also for the staff.
Okay, so with those outcomes in mind, this study that's reflected here was really looking at what are the components that make an SEL curriculum effective, because there's tons of options that are out there. There's more added every day. And so some of the common things that they found, number one, is that it's sequenced. So just like teaching reading or math, there is a sequence that you should kind of go through that's aligned to the Ohio SEL standards, that we're looking at both a skill focus as well as the school climate, multi-components. So there's also, not only the direct skill instruction, but teaching practices, there's family components. Teaching interpersonal skills first is important, because before you can get along with others, you need to be able to self-regulate, understand your emotions. And then making sure it's integrated seamlessly into the academic content, so that we don't get in a situation where it's an SEL person or an SEL place, and then high quality implementation. So we want to pick something that teachers are supported in and can implement, have the capacity to implement well. Slide. So last spring, we had kind of an ad hoc committee come together of teachers, support staff, administrators, and we took a bunch of different programs and used this selection tool to kind of narrow down to the 4 that we're going to share with you today. Looking at not only the evidence of the program and the outcomes that it provides, but really what is the fit of this program to CPS. So this tool provides some really specific questions the team would kind of go through along with a rubric to determine, do our teachers have the capacity? What type of supports does it provide us for implementation? Can we sustain it? Thinking about the other related priorities of MTSS, restorative practices, trauma, culturally responsive practices, House Bill 123, how can it support us in those, or is it going to detract from those? So those are some things that we use to come down to 4. Next slide. So we're looking at Character Strong, Second Step, Wayfinder, and then Character Effect, which is local through Beach Acres. And the schools, Manish is going to share the kind of the timeline, but we're piloting each of these programs for a month. They're all digital, and we're getting feedback regularly on them.
So let's take a look at who's all involved in this pilot. Across the district, we have building administrators, counselors, teachers, intervention specialists, social workers, school psychologists, and specialist teachers. It was very important for us to have a wide variety of teachers involved in this. We just didn't want a particular side of town or just 1 or 2 schools. We really wanted a wide representation so that we could see, would this product really work for us? And it's important for us to look at even the years of experience. For a new teacher or a teacher that has many years of experience, could it be a resource that we all could use? And then grade levels, really looking at preschool through 12th grade, even young adult. And then we also took a look at our exceptionality areas of like strides and members in our DSS community or student services department that could really see how we could use some of these resources, not just for tier 1, but for tier 2 and tier 3. So the timeline. This says we start in December 2024. But really, this started way back in 2018, and it's been like evolving of work that has gotten us to this place. But in December of 2024, we gathered the interest of who wanted to be on the committee and who wanted to just participate in the pilot and who was going to do both. And so then in January, we had a kickoff. We talked about what the commitment would be, what we're looking for, and that we just really want honest feedback. on helping to guide us in the next direction and steps that we should go as a district. And so each month from there, we've been piloting a different program where there's like a mini kickoff before the beginning of the month to explain the new program, the kind of nuances about the program. And then each week, there's a survey given, and the teachers and the respondents and the administrators, they give us data on their experiences with that product. In April, we did have a community PBIS fair that was located here in the cafeteria, where community members, parents could give feedback and engage with the product to give us their feedback from their perspective, because that's important as well. And so at the end of May, we're bringing the committee back together to really go through these programs, to really go through all of the feedback that we've been given to make recommendations. And so we'll also review with IT to make sure there's not compatibility issues as we implement, and then to kind of give us and guidance on next steps. We really want to take there's been questions around how will this be implemented district-wide? Is it forced day one? Everybody has to be on the same page. And really, we need to acknowledge that different schools are in different levels of their readiness to be able to take on the SEL curriculum. And so some schools are ready to run because they've had the systems in place. They've been using something, so they already have the time carved out. People are just dying. They're waiting for a consistent curricular modality to be able to use. And then other schools are, hey, help us to support the systems that will help support us when we get this. So we're ready to walk into this. We know we need it, but we need the supports. And then some are ready to jog. And so we want to be able to diversify the supports. We know that we might have to be able to prioritize depending on funding. The funding that we plan on using or being able to utilize are grant funds to be able to help support. And we've also had honest and transparent conversations with some of the vendors that are willing to help support us in grants that they feel would be applicable as well, to be able to help support us to gain access to the content. We know that if we'd had to prioritize, we've been doing a lot of work in supporting with the transition of schools that are impacted by the growth phase and also our middle schools, and that's a great place that we would love to start. We've been working with Ann and with the advisory team on being very collaborative so that schools see, hey, we've got time carved. How do we help support? Because there is overlap in some of the lessons during advisory. How do we make sure that we're supporting that work in those lessons? So that is our general timeline.
And so this just kind of shows you some little snippets of feedback that we've gotten from teachers who are piloting. So we're asking them every week about, we're really interested in student engagement, looking at developmental appropriateness, and then how long is it for teachers to prep? Do they feel like they can facilitate? And so these are some nice pieces of information we've gotten from them around building connections with their students and their content, enhancing their academic content, and just the overall engagement of the kids and ease of use.
I think you guys did record timing on that presentation. Thank you so much. Board members, any questions, comments? I do have a question. Is this new curriculum or is this old that we're gonna kind of, what?
So this would be new. This would be new. We've had some curriculum, for example, in the primary areas, they've been using paths in some areas, but really in our secondary, it has been whatever that they've had access to. Some maybe have had Character Strong. It just depends on the resources that they've had in their community.
Well, I want to commend you because the one thing I wrote down that I heard was grants. And so, and flexibility from the vendors around getting this paid for. So that is one thing I applaud you on, because we haven't been able to successfully do that in other departments for other things. But I appreciate that vendors are willing to work with us around getting the material in front of our students. So thank you for at least asking, because sometimes we have not because we ask not. So thank you for that. Board Member Craig?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think two things that I heard during the presentation I really wanted to highlight. One is that getting a level of consistency is important. And I think that's important because we have schools where we are not giving students an experience where they have an opportunity to learn who they are and what they want to know, what they want to be, and how they want to grow. And that gives a sense of value and purpose. The other thing that I think could be something that we, again, thinking about the fact that we have limited resources in our idealistic world, we would be given everything we need. There are programs and other things that out there that are also helpful to teach how to use some of the same skills inside of classes that are already being taught, right? So we talk about this a lot of times with math. For instance, if you're teaching math in a way that somebody feels they have a value to it, that they might use it, that might be important to how they learn, then they're more both likely to do well in the class, but also use the skills later. And so I think that's an aspect of, again, the idea of some professional development opportunities that might be something we'd consider down the line that allows us to speak more to not just teaching the subject matter, but how does the subject matter connect the student to feeling like this is a valuable thing in their life? Because I think the one thing I've heard, at least when my conversation with some of the students, is they don't understand why they need to know something. Right? Like they get it, like people tell them it's important, but when teachers take the time to give them the why it's important for them to learn, then they may have their own personal value in it. The third thing I will say is I do know there's a number of groups and other programs who are working at different levels in schools that offer some of the ethical, moral reasoning and some of these other things that could be another aspect of stuff that comes at some of the younger grades, where they're developing those early sets of what is right and wrong, what is good and bad, what is appropriate, not appropriate, that they may not always get when they leave the building. So, that's another aspect of this is that we just, we're talking about how the students interact with each other and being in a space where they learn to talk to each other and be around each other better, even if they're not getting it at home, can be a great way to impact them later in their educational process.
One of the things that we've been having dialogue and conversations with the vendors is implementation is so critical and key, and also integration with what we currently have with our content areas. And so are they committed to working with us to look at where there's crossover and where can this fit in a math lesson? If I'm getting ready to pull students for a science lab and they're working in groups, I might want to pull a quick 15-minute SEL lesson about collaboration or giving positive feedback or those types of things that could enhance the group experience. So those are definite things that we're looking at as well.
Vice President Bolton?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. Just a couple of things. On this adoption, it looks like it's scheduled, or what we would like to see scheduled May of this school year, or next year, or 25.
We would like to be able to for the committee to be able to give a recommendation at the end of May to the board so that we can see what the next steps should be for next year, if that's an opportunity.
Thank you. And I stepped out and maybe I missed, what's the cost of the curriculum?
So it ranges. They're all,
And you don't have to share that today. I mean,
we do have
because-
quotes for the
Okay.
vendors, yeah.
Just from a budget standpoint, it's highly problematic about new, and I know you guys know that better than I do, regarding new curriculum. That's why I'm interested in what you're saying about the integration piece. I worry greatly that curriculum in general is, like everybody else, might take a big hit. So I think it might be problematic to think in terms of new curriculum, even though this is so useful. The other piece is that, unfortunately, I hear almost interchangeably DEI and SEL and whatever. It's like kissing cousins. So it seems like the next target of these people on whatever spectrum, wherever they are in the spectrum of political views. But this is useful, and I think the integration and outside funding and whatever are things to be thinking about. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Board Member Mack.
I just want to say thank you for the presentation and all of the hard work that you have been doing to advocate for an SEL curriculum and really touching on every lens of how this really supports the whole child and how it can be integrated within our district. So thank you for your hard work and your diligence, right? Because I do know that it's a heavy lift, but you make it look so easy. So thank you.
Well, I want to say thank you. I know we do have some budget cuts, but I do think some things should just be fundamentally stable curriculum is one of those. How do you teach if you don't have a curriculum? So I appreciate that you and your team have looked for some grants and some ways to offset that. I'm going to invite other departments to do the same because maybe there's opportunity there. But I'm also interested to see the budget around it too. And would also invite you for me to submit maybe tiers. So, maybe here's the first tier and here's the second tier so that it's not an all or nothing. And that's how I'm thinking about it, because I do think it's very valuable, but I do recognize where we are from a financial standpoint as well. So maybe there's a way we could kind of integrate that in a tiered system. And I look forward to hearing about it. I believe we have you down for Monday to give us, I don't know, it's somewhere. So thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it. Any other comments, questions, concerns for the good of the group? Superintendent Murphy.
Just want to get then clarity, President Moffitt, on expectation for Monday, because I think at this point now it's been moved to a part of my recommendations. So if the expectation is something different.
You mean the budget for the curriculum adoption? Is that what you
Or
mean?
whatever it is that you may need as a next step for this presentation. I just want to be clear. Are you expecting further presentation?
Okay, so then let's clarify.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Board Member Lindy always asks this question: what is asked of us? So this is a great segue. So this was the presentation preceding the budget ask on Monday, the 19th. Is that right? Is that what you're saying? In your recommendation, was there going to be an ask on Monday for a vote on this?
So separate, the
Okay.
ask for a vote is for the previous presentation
Okay.
to accept the adjustments to the PBIS plan for next school year.
Okay, that's what I
I
thought.
thought, maybe I misunderstood. I thought I just heard a question or two about ask for Monday,
No, I
not
was,
connected to this piece.
well, is there an expectation for this presentation around SEL to be voted on for Monday that requires a budget thing for Monday?
If there is a budget request connected to this, so I'll go back administratively, I apologize. I don't think I have that yet.
Okay, I didn't think so. I
Okay,
thought
great.
that Vice President Bolton was just asking for more information around it. I didn't think it was for Monday. Okay, no, that wasn't for Monday.
Okay,
You're
so-
fine as
okay,
far as
great.
what you're thinking of. I thought you were saying something is in your recommendations for Monday for this.
Okay, so I think we're now I'm clear, not for the SEL presentation, but what the ask is for Monday to approve the adjustments to
The code of
the code of conduct.
Yes,
ma'am.
yes, we were
Okay.
fine on that.
Thank
This was
you.
for the SEO. Yeah, we got you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Superintendent Murphy, you just messed it up. Okay. You're fine. Superintendent Murphy, please introduce our final presentation.
Well, two more presentations, one on guardrail 4 from Assistant Superintendent Chambers and guardrail 3. And then, if it's pleasure, the next one is the Assistant Treasurer, soon-to-be
Yes,
Treasurer.
I'm going by
Is that-
my script, which my lovely admin has fixed. So
Okay.
this is the final for you.
Yes,
Listen, we
ma'am.
got you down. Don't worry about it. I got y'all.
Good evening, everyone. I am going to review our current data on guardrails 3 and 4. And just a reminder, guardrail 3 states the superintendent will not allow district communication to be unresponsive or lacking in transparency, community sensitivity, or inconsistent with the expressed values of the district. In guardrail 3A, the percentage of parent or caregivers who have a favorable response for the climate on the Qualtrics survey will increase from 62% in May of '23 to 66% by May of '25. And looking at our spring survey results, we had a 90% favorable response rate from our parents. And that was a composite score looking at items 22 through 28. And looking at the number of families that responded, we had 2,695 families that responded. And with that 90% favorable, that compares to the 85.4% favorable response with the same items in the fall survey. Some takeaways from the family survey. We looked at the question, "My student feels safe going to and from school," which had a 9.8% favorable rating. And also, we're looking deeper into the "I frequently volunteer," and that was at 58.9% favorable. And one of our celebrations was looking at the question, "How much does your school value student diversity?" And that was at 94.4%. Guardrail 3B, the percent of staff who have a favorable response for the climate on the Qualtrics survey will increase from 50% in May of '23 to 54% in May of '25. In the spring results, we had 2,405 staff respondents with an 82% favorable rating, looking at a composite of the items 27, 28, and 29. And that 82% favorable was a slight decrease from the fall, where we had 83.3% favorable. And just looking at the, just for reference, because I don't think it got highlighted, the last three questions, it's a composite score of those three questions. And some of our takeaways from the staff climate survey. One was the students at my school demonstrate behaviors that allow the teachers to teach, and that was at 61.4%. And we're looking deeper into that because we feel like that number, we need to get the number a lot higher, because we want the teachers to feel that their students give them an opportunity to teach. And the other question was, my school building is well maintained, and that is at 67.9. We would also like to see that percentage go up as well. And one of our celebrations was I get along with other staff members at my school, and that was at 97.2. So some of us who have been in schools know that is a really high number. In Guardrail 3C, the percentage of partners or other stakeholders who have a favorable response for communication on the district survey will increase to at least 80% by May of '25. In the fall, we had 68% favorable. And in the spring, we had an increase of 72. Not quite at the 80, but we are moving in the right direction, working towards that target of 80%. And our key takeaway, looking at the partner satisfaction, as I said, it rose from 51.7% to 72%. It indicates significant improvement in the relationships and responsiveness. And partner communication receives positive marks from the majority of our partners that were surveyed. And next steps, we're looking to review and enhance partner communication systems, and looking to host regular partner meetings and provide annual departmental impact reports that are ongoing, with ongoing initiatives, and holding consistent check-ins with the agencies to strengthen our relationships. Any questions on Guardrail 3? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Board Member Lundy.
Thank you very much. Could we go back to the first, I think, table of numbers on Guardrail 3?
The climate, family.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes, sir.
So I do have some questions, and I appreciate the chance to ask this. I wanted to say two things from jump. One is thank you for the work that went into the presentation. Thank you for continuing to commit time to talking about outcomes rather than inputs. I want to just share to my colleagues again my ongoing concern that we have a drift in our committee of the whole meetings away from monitoring outcomes. This used to be the first thing that we did in the majority of the time in Student Achievement Committee of the Whole meetings. That's why we made these full board a couple years ago. And we spent now a full 75% of our meeting time on something other than that. So I'm glad we're getting here. Would love it if we could continue to put this first and devote the majority of the time in these meetings to monitoring for outcomes. I think that's really where board activity is best put as an accountability function. But I'm glad we're here. I wanted to make sure I was understanding the data correctly, and so I had a couple of different questions. And I'll try to be as quick as I can. Can you just remind me, how are we defining favorable response?
We're looking at the percentage of the response to the question. The questions are favorable, highly favorable, and so we're looking at favorable and I think it's highly favorable, if I'm not mistaken, as the two that would define what we look at as a favorable response. Anything that is not favorable or highly unfavorable, we don't count that as, of course, a favorable response.
How many choices? Are you giving 5 options?
There's 5
Do you give-
options, yes,
And then this is the percent who are in either of the top 2 categories?
correct.
Okay, has that always been the case? I have this memory of this being different in an earlier meeting, but I also sometimes misremember things. It's always been this way?
Yes.
Okay. So then, and can you go back one slide? Okay, so 62% in May 23. This was when we were using the previous survey, right? We were using the Panorama. We're now no longer using Panorama. I understand it's very expensive. I understand we need to cut costs. Is there any way of comparing these numbers to where we used to be? And can you talk about how, just remind me how you all are thinking about this?
I don't want to get into too much of the technical piece because that's not my lane, but we can pull out the data. The questions are comparable. So we can pull out the data from previous surveys. The fall survey, we use the exact same questions. But in previous years, we can go back and look to see how we can correlate the 2 surveys and come up with.
I'm just trying to understand, like, I understand how these questions let us look at improvement since we started using the questions. And I got to start somewhere. And I think, if we're not going to be able to use the old questions, we just got to start over. What I'm trying to understand is does this, and I think it's okay if the answer is no. I want to be clear about what inferences I can draw from this and cannot draw from this. So does this let us say anything about changes that happened prior to the questions changing?
Can I get back with you with that after I talk to Brian?
Yeah,
Session?
what I'm taking with is we don't know currently.
Currently, yes.
Okay, so if we go forward one more slide, so this is telling us about what's happened this school year. But we don't actually, it might, but we're not sure whether it tells us anything about what happened in prior school years.
Correct.
Okay. And then I had just one data question. In that my student feels safe going to and from school, which as a parent feels like probably the most important question on this list. It's 11% favorable. And then I think in a subsequent slide, it said 9.8%. If we go forward a couple. Yeah, here it said 9.8%. I was just trying to understand, like, why is it 11 on one slide and why is it 9.8 on the other slide? And I think, to be clear, if I'm misreading this, I apologize. I really don't want people to feel like I'm going to nitpick every single number, like this is hard, this is a lot of work. I really genuinely appreciate it. This happens to be a particularly important question and a particularly low number, and so it concerned me that it was different on different slides.
Now, if you look at go back. I think it is, I'm trying to count the questions because they're not numbered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think it's question 6. The family response. You're right, that is a different number than I have on mine. So I need to check that out because it is not the same number that I have.
And please feel free to get back to me. I think like the bigger, I have just ongoing concerns about the time we dedicate to this, the rigor of the numbers that we use, and whether or not they're telling us things that are meaningful about whether the inputs that we're doing are actually having the outcomes that we want in the schools. And I think particularly on student safety, I think this is just a really important area.
I agree. And even 9.8 or 11, I think that number is still incredibly low. We need to improve on that.
Board Member Craig.
So I just wanted to maybe dive a little bit off of where Board Member Lindy was with regard to this parents. I did think it was a little bit interesting. There's a line on the staff one where it's, I think it's 85% say they feel safe at schools, but then only 64% have a favorable response to, I've been concerned about my physical safety at school. And I think that's one of those things where I wonder some ways, are we asking too many questions that will elicit different responses based on like, do I feel safe? Sure. But have I ever been worried? Yep. Like, you know what I mean? Like that to me may tell us a different picture than what we actually maybe should be asking, which is, what do you feel about the safety of the school and the environment, more so than have you ever had a safety issue? But I think to that point, it's just something that we all are paying attention to. We all have to acknowledge that, especially in light of us being in an urban community, we are going to have safety risks. We're going to have things that happen in our district that we have no control over. And I think our staff and our families are telling us this is a concern to them and that this is something that we should be paying a lot of attention to, because if our kids don't feel safe, if our staff doesn't feel safe, they're not going to make it to school. And so I think that's helpful information for us to learn. But I took note of how some of these, also maybe the question asked and how the question's interpreted, because how I feel safe may be very different than how you feel safe. That doesn't mean that nothing's ever happened.
Right.
Well, thank you for this presentation. I looked at this data kind of on a cursory level and was like, whoa, some of these are outliers. So for me, I attributed it to the fact that there was a difference between the Qualtrics and the Qualtronic, whatever it is, and versus the Panorama. But I also think to take the data off the paper is significant around school safety. And the other one on this particular slide that resonates with me is the fourth from the bottom that says, students at my school demonstrate behaviors that allow teachers to teach and students to learn. Some of those that were really low are very indicative that we have some things to work on with regard to safety, with regard to attitudes. My question was around, do we know what grades are successfully completing this survey for families? Because we celebrate 2,400 participants, and that makes me cringe when there are 22,000 families or 25,000 families. It's a nice number if you're just coming from zero, but it's not indicative of the majority. So I kind of want to understand, what grade level, is it primarily elementary families that are completing the survey, and we're not getting any high school families? The safety of our elementary students is slightly different to me, not less important than the safety of our high school students. And if they're not represented at all, that's a concern. So for me, this is great. This is a great start as far as a dump of data, but there are things in here that are screaming at me as themes that we need to be pulling out. And I want to invite the administration to do that, to kind of look at some of these things and extrapolate them, not just report them to me, but actually tell me what those numbers mean, because they have some value. And it also, for me, will determine what level of scrutiny and cuts I'm willing to make. If safety is a huge concern, then I don't want to make people feel unsafe by cutting things that would be indicative of that safety. Regardless of what the administration is suggesting, if the data is saying something different, then that's what I'm going to be dependent upon. So I want to invite the administration to kind of take this data and disaggregate it and tell me what these themes are, where this is coming from, what schools, what grades, what is the plan to get more engagement. I think it's nice to have 2,400 participants, but that's not nearly enough to make a full decision, especially some things that are going to impact significant themes that I can see just from right there. So to address my colleagues, when we combined the student achievement and the committee of the whole meetings together, I made the decision, just in taking over, to put all things or most things academic under the cows. And then the things that we need to vote on go at the business meeting. So that's just part of the reason why, to my colleague's point, we're talking about other things. They're supposed to be tending to academics in nature, but it will also be these sorts of things as well. Just wanted to offer that to my colleague. Board Member Lindy.
Thanks. I realize I had one more question. Are we giving the survey again this year? Or this is it?
It was that, this was the spring.
Okay, can we go to slide 9 for a second? This says that we need to hit 85% by May of 2025. It is May of 2025. We are not, right? We're not giving the survey again?
I was referring to the student, staff, and parent survey. Now, the community partner survey, it may be given one more time, I'm not sure, but we are we're finished with the parent, student, and staff survey. So I'll have to check on that.
I think same question, though, like it's May 14th. This says we're going to hit 80% by May 2025. That gives us 17 days. It's currently at 72%. Look, it's okay if we missed the goal, we missed the goal, we'll figure out what's next. I'm just trying to make sure, is this accurate or not? And it's concerning that it says that the goal is May, it is May, it's 72. 72 is not 80, but it says on track. Like, am I missing something?
No, I just wanted to make sure, I didn't want to speak out of turn because I'm not sure what that department, with Mr. Badger's department, if they have an end of the year culminating survey with the community partners. So I just didn't want to say they're done when I'm not 100% sure.
Are they done? Or either way, we're not going to have another Cal meeting before after this is over. Like, I think it just, I am increasingly concerned that it's just hard to know how much we can lean on the reporting when like numbers don't match on different slides, like it says it's on track and it says that it's over. And so I think, from my perspective, I said this at the outset, I think the most important thing the board does is hire the superintendent. The second most important thing the board does is provide an accountability function to see whether or not we are reaching the outcomes we have charged the superintendent with reaching. It is not possible for us to do that if there's, I think, a certain level of uncertainty in what's coming to us on these things, and if we're not spending enough time on it. And so I've shared that. That's my perspective, and I appreciate all the work. Thank you.
Mr. Lundy, so this survey has been given to partners twice, once in the fall, once in the spring. There isn't a plan over the next couple of weeks to give the survey to the partners again.
And that makes sense. I think it would be odd to give it twice in the spring. I think this just shouldn't say on track. It should say we missed it by 8 percentage points. Am I taking crazy pills? Like, am I missing something? Okay, thank you.
So I appreciate the conversation with my colleagues, and we'll definitely get, was that the end of your presentation?
No, I have guardrail 4.
Okay.
That,
I had a question about.
Oh, wait, hold on one second, Mr. Chambers.
So I just wanted to inquire about the staff survey result compilation. I know there was a tab that we could click on. And so I'm just curious to know, several of these schools have very low participation in the survey. And so I'm curious to know, have you inquired about, or maybe your team inquired about, what is driving these low numbers in terms of participation, and how we can also work to improve, because we want to know across the board as much as we can how they are experiencing the climate survey as well.
that is something that we've, talked with the principals about, working to increase participation from their families. And we'll just have to continue to, engage with those principals and, with the schools to ensure that their parents, we have a higher participation rate.
Right, so I'm not just speaking only about the parents, but I'm also speaking because the staff take
And the
this
staff
survey
as
as
well.
well, right? And so even in the staff taking the survey, I'm curious to know, do they feel supported and safe in providing maybe honest feedback as they're, taking this? Or could that be attributing to maybe some of the low numbers? Because essentially it would account against, so if they gave a negative response in terms of the survey.
It's an
that-
anonymous survey. So once once they take it, they just can't take it again, but we don't know, with the staff surveys, we have no idea what staff member responded which way on the survey. So I can't tell you, I can tell you the number of, staff from a particular school, but I couldn't tell you those individual staff members.
Right. I'm not looking for individual staff members, but I'm just looking at as you said, the staff results here. And some are extremely low out of the staff members that are specifically in that school. And so again, my question is around, essentially, if staff members take this survey, or if administrators take this survey and they're providing their honest feedback, which we want them to do, but then that would kind of present to be a negative, it could potentially be a negative reflection on their school, right? And so I'm just curious to know if there is support and really pushing for the staff at each particular school to engage in this work.
And we do that by ensuring, that their, participation in the survey is anonymous. So, it's not going to be, it may be something that may negatively reflect on the school, but it won't be attributed to a particular individual. The schools have their individual reports where they go over how the staff and the students in their buildings responded to the survey. This is an overall, but each individual schools has their own report from the climate surveys from the fall and the spring.
Okay, I have one more question. So we see that there's a survey specifically for the schools. Is there some type of survey that is able to be provided, I guess, for like administration or for like the senior leadership team?
We can work on that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr.
Okay, I'll
Chambers, keep going.
speed it up. Guardrail 4, this is superintendent shall not propose or recommend the acquisition or distribution of resources that are unanalyzed or unrated for quality or favored status granted to local women or minority marketplace providers for goods and services. In Guardrail 4A, says the percent of suppliers meeting diversity criteria receiving RFP solicitations will increase from 46% in May of '23 to 50% in May of '25. And if you look, we had, in fall, we had 64.2%, so we exceeded that goal, but we also built upon that with the spring at 73%. And Guardrail 4B, the percent of suppliers meeting diversity criteria on the approved vendor list will increase from 74.2% in May of '23 to 80% by May of '25. Again, we have exceeded that goal with 108% in the, or excuse me, 88.9% in the spring of '24-25, as opposed to 108% in the fall of '24-25. And going to the key takeaways. Increasing the number of vendors invited to participate in the request for proposals process has significantly contributed to advancing the supplier diversity goals. And our next steps, we're looking to strengthen and sustain the supplier diversity within the district by optimizing internal processes, increasing awareness, and embedding inclusion through targeted education and training. And key takeaways for Guardrail 4B, we believe that clearly defining the definition of local business in accordance to Chief Burkhart's presentation on November 4th, and fully implementing the Payment Works online vendor portal. It allows the vendors to update and manage their own information and has led to notable improvement with data accuracy across the district's vendor base. And next steps is to support the commitment to supplier diversity and maintain accurate, up-to-date vendor records. And we continue to invite all prospective and current vendors to register through the district's Payment Works online portal. That is the end of Guardrail 4.
Any questions? Board Member Lindy.
Thanks. Can we go to slide 13 for a second? Can you explain for a little moment the 108% number?
He explained it to me, but he can explain it a whole lot better than I can.
So when the guardrail was set up, it was to look at both, or all three, minority, women-owned, and local vendors. When we put the data together and had that submitted, it was adding all three together. So if you checked one of the boxes, you were given credit for that. So it's out of 100%, this is actually out of 300%. So the ceiling is different for this metric versus other metrics.
So there's a reason why you could have a percentage that is over 100 that
Correct.
makes sense. Great, that was my question. Thank
Okay,
you.
yes. I'll stay here in case there's others.
Okay. Now you got my researcher brain, because I kind of understood where you were going.
So
to a
there's
point.
3 different metrics that go into the one guardrail: women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and local-owned businesses. You can be one of the 3, you can be 2 of the 3, you could be 3 of the 3. So in order for us to look at that, we took, if you were a minority-owned business, that was a percentage. If you took a local business, that was a percentage. And if you took a women-owned business, that was a percentage.
Well, I get that that's the way you did it. I just don't quite understand, because why the goal doesn't differentiate those 3. It just classifies different diversity. You've defined diversity as 3 different categories. So if they meet one of those 3 that fulfills that category, why would you count it 2 additional times? Because the goal doesn't differentiate that.
This is the way I was asked to do it.
Okay, so we need to go back and look at the goals and the guardrails then, because that doesn't make sense.
Yes, I would have rather split them out 3 different ways so you can actually see the aggregated data for each one of those, because each one of them are significant in their own ways, and there's reasons why we're looking at them both separately and together. So we look at, for example, as we look at the local, we proposed to the board, and the board adopted a new local policy so we could be more inclusive of looking at local. We also looked at RGMA, which is a outside company. I think I shared the report with the board on how we can specifically drill into women-owned companies and what are those strategies that we're using specifically for women-owned, and then again for minority-owned companies. The other thing that we did, and that we currently are continuously doing, is looking at which companies might be changing over the course of their lifespan. So if you came into the district maybe 10 years ago and you weren't one of those 3, but over time, maybe you have different ownership, maybe you've moved where you're located, we want to make sure that we continuously go out and update those as well. So that goes to that process as well.
Thank you, and I think that's important, but that doesn't, it's still confusing. The board has adopted local policies around, or a definition of local with regard to vendors. We wouldn't say local is Cincinnati, and it's Greater Cincinnati, and it's Westchester, we're gonna count you 3 times. You define what local is, and then it counts once. And that's what I'm saying. We need to define what diversity is, and then it counts once. To count it 3 times is redundant and unnecessarily confusing. So I'm going to invite the administration to look at this and clarify some of these slides, because that doesn't make sense to me that it would be counted. You cannot have 108%. You just, I mean, you can't. Make it make sense to me. So I'm going to go back to my colleagues. I'm sorry, I usually go last, but I wanted to, when you said that, I'm like, that doesn't make much sense to me. But Board Member Lindy.
I'm trying to make sure I understand too. So the denominator here is the total number of vendors.
Correct.
And then the numerator, the way I assumed, and this may be assumed incorrectly, would be you get in the numerator if you satisfy at least one or more of those criteria. So like if you have 3 vendors and at the beginning of the year, none of them meet any of the criteria, you'd have a 0%. But if at the end of the year, you have 3 vendors and one of those vendors meets one criteria, you'd have 33%. But if instead you had that one vendor who met all 3 criterias, you'd still have 33%. You wouldn't suddenly have 100%, right?
Correct.
So like, I'm still not totally sure I understand how you get above 100.
Okay, so what was asked of administration, right, wrong, or indifferent, was to take the denominator of, let's say, 2,500 vendors. So we would have a percentage of those vendors that are minority, and that would be a given number. Let's say that's 20%. We would then have another set of vendors that are local. Maybe that's 40%. Then we have another set of vendors that are women-owned, which could be another 30%. So we're adding those percentages together, and that's how we're getting over 100%.
I got it. And
I
have we
did not
done that
set
the
this
same
up.
each year?
It's been tracked the same way every single time we've done it. So the data, and the data was shared each time along the way, showing how the number has increased in each one of those buckets. So the data hasn't changed. The way we reported it hasn't changed. I understand, and I have the same concern. I don't think it's genuine to the ask.
I got it. Thank you.
I think we need to fix the word diversity for a multitude of reasons. Because A, it's not representative of what the diversity is, but also we're being asked about DEI with regard to our federal funding, so we may want to clarify that. Board Member Craig.
Yeah, and I'll be trying to be quick because I want to give Mike an hour to talk here. But this is something that came up when we started looking at using local and minority and women-owned businesses many, many years ago, before any of us, with maybe the exception of Eve, was on the board, because we did not track accurately and did not have a way to necessarily always have an accurate measure of what is what. And so folks got put into categories, and it was really just trying to add all of those up. Why that was not something that we were doing to look at this, I think also had a lot to do with how we were looking at vendors, period, because at that time also we had a number of vendors who were providing services that we were no longer going to use. And so the focus was really more on maintaining vendors as opposed to necessarily what's the best way to track what those numbers look like and how those numbers should be considered. I think an easy fix to that would be just to track if you meet one or more, you count as one. That is the easiest way to fix it, and that's something we can track and go back and look at some of the other things and that kind of deal to measure. It may require us to adjust what the goal is, because where our starting point would be different than maybe different than where it was when we looked at it at the time. But I think this all stemmed from the conversation around if we were losing vendors, as we're thinking about what vendors are participating, we wanted a complete number of all the different aspects of whether or not somebody was local, whether they were minority owned or women owned, because those are also categories that up until more recently, the state even recognized and appreciated and valued, because they gave grants out for minority owned businesses, they gave grants out for women owned businesses, they gave different benefits to how you operate it based on those things. So I think the easy fix would be just to recalculate and recalibrate based on that idea of if you meet one of the three, you're in the numerator, to Board Member Lindy's point. I will say also, though, as we have that discussion, as we think about those things, there may be aspects of this that are more valuable for certain aspects of vendors. So for instance, being able to get a product quicker it may be better off to have a local vendor for food service, for instance, as opposed to a field where there may not be women and minority owned. And so, I mean, I think that may be another thing that we as a board can sit down and think about and talk about as we look at these numbers is, are there other particular things underneath that, when we think about the diversity number, that are more important? So we've done this in budget and finance. We talked about local vendors on certain products were very difficult to have the stock that it would a national vendor. And so we have to just recognize that if that was going to be something that was going to higher cost, or these other things that might come with that, owning that. I know Mr. Burkhardt and others came in and did a presentation on that last year, where we talked about some of the facility stuff that we've been using, some of the grounds and these type of things that we've tried to move to local. The only other thing I would add to that is that there was also the conversation about green as a part of that vendor philosophy. And so I think whatever we decide as a board is we maybe reconsider the guardrail, or what the guardrail means. Is the other question might be asked is, are some of these vendors that are more green, that are using more natural elements or having more natural things to their products, an aspect of what we would want to think about as a way of expanding what we consider diversity in an effort to not make it all about just, are you a minority, are you a woman, or local owned?
Thank you. I personally would like this. I don't want it to just be one, if you meet one criteria. I want to know how many women vendors we have, how many minority. So that, I want the data, I just don't want it lumped together. So, and you have the data. I think you have it exactly how we originally intended it, because I remember having this conversation, but it was not to put it all together. It was kind of like, what in each category. But thank you for the presentation and the explanation. Okay, our next topic is a continued discussion about the fiscal year 2026 budget by Assistant Treasurer Gustin.
Thank you, Dr. Moffett. Appreciate the time today. I know usually don't do a lot of financial stuff in this committee, but Monday's board meeting will have a lot of financial stuff. So wanted to specifically talk about federal funds. We've had a lot of questions about that have come up lately. And so first thing just kind of to talk about is, it's not just a block. Like, there are a series of different programs that are all federal allocations for us. If you go to the next slide, Rob. One question people always ask is how much? So next year, we're anticipating about $47 million in new money across all these different federal funds. Anticipating having about $6.5 million of carryover as well to spend. So that's a total of $53 million, almost $54 million of money that we'll have to spend. That does not include the non-public share. I won't get into that, but we also do help our non-publics in our district manage their share of federal funds as well. So big number, $47 million is kind of the total new impact that we have next year across all these funds. If you go to the next couple slides, one of the things is, what do we do with that? What does the district get with that? And I think what's interesting is, as we kind of go through the list of each of these, you can see things we talked about. So for Title I, for example, we've had many conversations here about reading and math specialists. Last board meeting, there was a hearing of the public about ELL coordinators. That is another title-funded position. Summer school, we've talked about that here as well. Summer school is mostly Title I and some other funds. So those are big pictures there. If you go to Title II, Title II is really about recruiting, developing, and retaining effective teachers, which I think is a big goal that we discussed quite a bit. We use a lot of that for PD, for recruitment efforts, for mentorship, those sort of things. Title III is for our English language learners. And these are a lot of additional services that we can push in to support those students. Unfortunately, it's not a lot of money. So we have far more need than we have funding in this area, but it definitely helps. And then Title IV, and we just talked about this. Title IV does a lot of our behavioral intervention supports. It funds a lot of the PBS social workers, funds part of the resource coordinators. So, and the honor pouches. We used Title IV to pay for the honor pouches that we started today's meeting talking about. So high level, big impact from all the titles. Other thing to talk about is the IDEA funds. So these are directly for students with disabilities. I mean, this money puts teachers and paras directly in classrooms to support students with disabilities. So helps us with home instruction, helps us with bus monitors, helps us manage those programs to make sure that we're providing students with the appropriate education they have. And then just the final wrap up is what it looks like for fiscal year 26. So federal fiscal year 26 budgeting started. This won't impact us until our fiscal year 27. So the federal fiscal year starts in October. So by the time it works through, but there's some big picture things there. So Title I and IDA would stay at their current levels of spending. Title III would be completely eliminated by the current proposal. And then Title II and Title IV would be consolidated into block grants that would go to the state level. So all of that shouldn't impact us this next fiscal year, but in 2 years, these things could be coming down the pike, and it could definitely change some of the things that we're able to do or how we're able to fund those things.
Thank you. We wanted to have the board members and the public to get an understanding of what, as we talk about title funding and DEI, what is potentially lost. So that's why we got a presentation from the treasurer's office. Board members have any questions? Board member Craig?
And I'm sure we're going to talk about this again on Friday as part of Budget Finance Committee, or maybe talk some variation on this. But I did want to maybe highlight one point, not so much as a question, but the Title III part is a really significant part because we do have such a huge amount of our student population who are not, who are multilingual learners, whose families are multilingual learners. And as you know, even Mr. Gusson and I saw this week, we're at a school where there's 9 different languages spoke by the students and their families within the school. And so as this becomes a bigger issue, especially on our western half of our city, the reality is we're going to need to think about ways to address the overall need, even when we may not be able to do so through the funding mechanisms that we've historically had. I think it also just shows the federal government's priorities with regards to our immigrant students and how they learn. But I do think this is maybe one of those things as we think about our budget planning for next fiscal year's budget, that this is something that we get an early start on, because even the dollars we have, even if they were maintained, aren't sufficient to support the student population that we have. And I know other districts across the country have looked at ways to work with other organizations or other ways of getting funding for other grants purposes that may not pay directly to a teacher's salary, but if there's other things that we can defer out of those funds connected to the student learning experience for English language learners, it may be something that will help us, whether it's getting materials, whether that's getting resources covered, or something else that might be a way to at least cover some of those things that we are paying for. Or for instance, the welcome centers and the other things that we have proposed to do. So I do think that Title III is a really big aspect of, it's not a lot of money, to be quite honest. It's not enough to do what we do, but it is still a big hit that the district would have to find a way to rethink or reimagine if we didn't have it.
Great point. Board member Matt?
So Board Member Craig literally just spoke about the concern that I had and really kind of rolled out some of the thinking that I was processing as well. To that point, is there a way, or what is the administration's thinking around trying to make sure that we're supporting our students and our families, considering that this fund has been eliminated? And also, can some of those, I guess, maybe needs be absorbed in other funds, or will we not be able to support our students in that way? Like if we're thinking about Title I, we know that there's an intersectionality, right, with some of these different, title funding. So I'm just curious to know, like, what you all's thinking is around still ensuring that we're supporting our students.
Before you answer that question, I do need to state that with the loss of our colleague, Board Member Lindy, leaving the meeting, we have lost our quorum, and the rest of this meeting is for informational purposes only. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I mean, I think for next year, we're not anticipating the loss, so it's like it's a 2-year out thing. I do think, and I think you're right, there's some intersectionality with the title funds. I didn't want to try to create a slide for that. I probably will, to show that, some things that are Title III can also be Title I. Some things that are Title IV can be Title I, and we try to match as best we can. So I think Title I's more broad, so there's definitely opportunities to move some things in that direction as those needs arise.
Right. Any other questions, comments, concerns for the good of, for the informational purposes only of the public? All right. Well, we will see each other again on Monday, the 19th, for our regular board business meeting. Thank you all so much that presented, and to our admin team. And the chair will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Is there a second of the three?
Second.